Hitchhiking may seem like an easy shortcut, but you never know just who the person sitting in the driver's seat truly is. Even if you've met them a couple of times, is a couple of miles on foot really worth the risk of taking what might be your last ride? Now, gather round and listen well to Petrifying Passenger. This story takes place when my granny was in her late teens. At the time, she and some of her family had gone over to the house of some of her other relatives. They stayed long past the time they meant to, and it was starting to get dark. Since Granny had quite a few siblings still at home, the little vehicle her father drove was usually very cramped by the time everyone piled in. Often the eldest kids would just walk home when the weather wasn't too bad, to avoid feeling like sardines packed in a tin can. However, even though the area was relatively safe, this was back in the mountains, so walking at night still carried some hazards. Since nobody wanted to run across an angry mama bear or step into a sinkhole, Granny and one of her oldest sisters decided they would start heading home before it got too dark. Not long before, an acquaintance of her father's had stopped as he was passing through the chat. Since the man was going to be headed past Granny's house on the way to his own home, he volunteered to drive the girls home. Now, this was before the days of Ted Bundy, so there wasn't a lot of media hype at the time to make people back in the sticks wary the way they are today. So, because Granny's father was sort of acquainted with the driver of the car, he was fine with the girls hitching a ride with him. Mind you, he knew the driver, but not the driver's passenger. Now, my great-grandfather was an incredibly intelligent man, but he made some very poor choices in his youth. This was one of them. The driver of the car waved an arm and told the girls to hop in. Petunia, innocent as she was, immediately hopped in. Granny warily looked to the driver and then to her father before being shooed inside as well. Since her father was a strict disciplinarian, his word was law, and she would rather have obeyed it blindly at the time rather than incurring his wrath. But as the door closed behind her, Granny felt as if someone had walled her up inside of a tomb, alive. A horrible, almost overpowering feeling of doom welled up within her as the car began to peel away. She couldn't have been in the car for more than 30 seconds before she noticed the person in the front passenger seat was turning around toward her. Out of all of the experiences Granny has told me about, she claims that, to this day, the feeling she got from that man was one of the most terrifying. This guy, he first looked over at Petunia, who was just chattering away. He looked the young woman over in a strange, thorough way Granny had never seen before turning to Granny herself. He did the same with her, his eyes trailing from what he could see of her legs upwards, a horrid leer on his face. The moment he made eye contact with Granny, well, that was it. The atmosphere in the car had been unsettling and the way he had looked over her sister had been equally uncomfortable. But one look into those cold eyes of his was enough for her. Granny said that, though he was smiling and answered Petunia's questions cordially, he had the most intense look of hatred she had ever experienced radiating from his eyes. His pupils were wide, his gaze cold, and his grin suddenly began to seem far more a bloodthirsty grimace than a haughty grin. One look in his eyes, and it was as if a bucket of cold, icy water had been thrown in Granny's face. It set her off. She started screaming, shoving her sister toward the door and telling her to open it. Petunia wasn't used to seeing her sister lose it like that, so she complied on instinct. Thankfully, the car couldn't have been going more than 10 miles per hour down this dirt road to keep from kicking up dust on everybody at the house, as Granny practically tore her way out of the moving car as it crested a hill. She knocked Petunia out of the car in her own haste to get away, yanked her sister to her feet, and began running back toward her father, screaming at the top of her lungs. Petunia followed, sprinting as fast as she could, shouting at my grandmother and trying to figure out just what the heck was going on. Obviously, the sound of my granny screaming like the devil himself was on her tail brought her father back out of the house, as well as everybody else in the vicinity. Granny didn't stop running or screaming until she was nearly at the doorstep, and it wasn't until her father started shaking her to try to get her to tell him what was so terrible it made her lose her mind during a 2-minute-long car ride that she was finally able to stop screaming. Once she had been able to catch her breath, she told her father what she felt and the way the creepy guy had looked at her and her sister. She expected she might get punished for overreacting, but her display had actually unnerved her father to the point that he wound up gathering everyone up and taking them home right then so she could calm down. She wasn't quite sure why, but her father actually took her bad feelings seriously enough that he went to talk to the driver a few days after that. Granny isn't sure what transpired during the visit, but while she saw the driver a few times out town after that, he never again approached anyone in her family. She also never saw the creepy guy ever again, much to her relief. Well, my friends, I hope you all pay attention to your instincts. They've helped both my granny and myself out of some very scary situations. So when your gut speaks up, listen. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell to catch your latest spooky fix the moment it comes out. And check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/Phantasmal Poppy. Thank you. Good night. And see you all real soon.